Hello, Joseph here again with another video. And today I'm going to talk about three albums that, which two of them I recently found in the bargain bins at my local shop, the $5 bins to be exact. And that's one of the things that I'm going to focus on with my channel is kind of under the radar albums. Yeah, occasionally I'll get into the more mainstream ones because I listen to those too. But I always enjoy finding under the radar bands. I've always enjoyed that ever since I was a kid. And at this point in my life, sometimes I find things in the bins of albums that I used to have, but I don't have anymore. So it's a real pleasure when I can find them in the bins, and it renews the spark and interest in this great music that some people have not heard of. And hopefully it gives you, if you watch this video, an opportunity to check some of this music out if you haven't heard it. And perhaps the album I'm most excited about is an album by a group called Dreams. And they're a group that came out in 1970. And it's got a really remarkable lineup. You can see it, first of all, it's got a really cool cover. And the name of the band is Dreams. And the horn section is a very young Brecker brothers. Of course, Randy on trumpet, Michael on tenor. Michael at the time was really young, but it's an amazing group. Also on trombone is Barry Rogers. He was a very prominent trombone player on the salsa scene in New York City. He played with Eddie Palmieri and many Latin bands. So it's a very powerful horn section. Originally the band started as a trio with Jeff Kent, Doug Lubhan, who I later found he's the bass player, and he was the bass player on some of the early Doors sessions. I had never caught that name before, but yeah, Doug Lubhan is on bass. And of course, the drummer is the incredible Billy Cobham. So it's quite a group. It's almost a super group, but this was before they were named artists. So it's like I say, it's very incredible. The music, I hadn't heard this music probably in many years. Of course, I've streamed it at times, but hearing the album and listening it to as a whole is just really remarkable. What's unique about this group Dreams is the horns. They have arrangements, but they're not as tight and maybe as formal as, say, Chicago or Blood, Sweat, and Tears. It's got a more loose, jazzy type feeling, almost at times, almost a New Orleans type thing, but in a more hip, modern way. And Randy Brecker and Michael really are outstanding on this. One of my favorites is a song called Holly Be Home, where it's almost like a dream-like, no pun intended, song with Randy really weaving in and out, and with a bunch of wah-wah guitars in the background. But really outstanding, beautiful song. The name of the singer on this is Edward Vernon. He's a pretty good vocalist too. They did another album, Imagine My Surprise, about a year or two later, produced by Steve Cropper. It's a good album too. In fact, I used to listen to that one more, but as I found this one in the bins recently, I'm really enjoying Dreams. Check it out. And that made me dig a little bit into my own collection about another jazz rock band that's somewhat under the radar, and that's Ballin'Jack. Ballin'Jack is another jazz rock band with some horn players. It's got three horn players, a tenor, a saxophone player, trombone, and trumpet player. But this is some funky stuff. It's funk, jazz. It sometimes get a little bit commercial sounding, somewhat like the more commercial sides of early Chicago, but it's a good thing. And apparently this band was sampled by some of the early rappers in the 90s, particularly a song called I Found a Child. And like I say, they can get very jazz orientated, jazz rock, but they can also get very funky. They got, like I say, they were founded by Ronnie Hammond on drums and Luther Rabb and Glenn Thomas. And they were associated with Jimi Hendrix out of Seattle. In fact, Hendrix was so impressed by them that they went on the Cry of Love tour with Hendrix. I believe probably was in 1970 or whenever that album was released. But once again, this is one of my albums that I had way back as a teenager, and I always gave it a listen. I've had this for a couple years, and it's outstanding. They went on to do a couple more albums. This is on the red, of course, Columbia label, Ballin'Jack. But they went on to do a couple more albums, and they were really an incredible band live from what I hear. You can hear maybe a couple clips on YouTube with them, and they have a live album that really smokes. It was recorded live at the Swing Auditorium a couple years after, probably 72 or 73. But don't sleep on Ballin'Jack. And last but not least, this is a group that everybody's heard of, but it's still somewhat of a sleeper. And this is, of course, Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And we all know Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Of course, the David Clayton Thomas years, and of course, the first album by Al Kooper. But this is the album New Blood that was done after David Clayton Thomas left the band. And that's why it's called New Blood. They had a new singer named Jerry Fisher. They had a new a couple new horn players, Lou Marini Jr., who would go on with the Blues Brothers and the Saturday Night Live band. Also, who else is on here? Oh, Larry Willis on piano. The incredible Larry Willis, who was quite the jazz player. And one of the stories behind this album, actually, Joe Henderson, of course, the jazz great Joe Henderson, he joined the band for a short time before this album, but he left the band before this recording, and there's very few tapes of him playing with the band, but that would have been really interesting. I would have loved to hear Joe Henderson with Blood, Sweat, and Tears, but it's probably good that he went on to his own music. But this is, like I say, David Clayton Thomas left the band. This is a new singer, Jerry Fisher, and there's some outstanding tunes on here. They do a really great version of Maiden Voyage with their guitar player George Wadnius. He was from Switzerland, I believe, but yeah, he was from Europe, and he does that thing like George Benson where he sings in unison with his solos. But it's really nice, beautiful version of Maiden Voyage. There's a couple other great songs on here. A Snow Queen, which was a Carole King song where the horns really shine. Dave Bargeron on trombone. The trombone is always outstanding, and of course Lou Marini. So even though this is later Blood, Sweat, and Tears, after this I kind of somewhat lost interest in Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and they continued on off and on for a couple years. David Clayton Thomas would rejoin them, but this one and the album after it was called No Sweat, was pretty much the end of the line for me with Blood, Sweat, and Tears. But this one is really finds the band still in great form. So that's a little bit about some jazz rock bands that perhaps are under the radar and well worth checking out. Joseph out.